Walter Green tended his late wife's garden every sunrise. Today, he found tire tracks and snapped lilies instead. The morning light stretched across Sycamore Lane like honey pouring from the sky. It filtered through the willows and danced across the dew-dusted petals of Martha's roses, brushing the edges of the oaken fence Walter had hammered together with his own hands half a lifetime ago. He stood at the edge of the garden, wearing his worn flannel shirt and straw hat. The same one Martha used to tease him about, called it his retirement crown. In one hand, a tin watering can. In the other, a half-drunk cup of diner coffee, already cooling. He crouched down and traced a finger along the broken stems. Fresh. The soil was gouged, tire treads deep and deliberate, crushing the lilies they'd planted together that first spring after her diagnosis. Walter didn't speak. He just let the breeze carry away the sigh he hadn't realized he'd held. Years ago, Martha had said it like a prayer. "This garden will outlive me, Walter. Don't let anyone ruin it." He'd nodded, of course. He always did when she spoke with that far-off look in her eyes, the one that somehow saw past her own fading strength and into seasons he'd have to live without her. He stood slowly, knees aching in that dull, familiar way, and made his way back toward the porch. The grits on his breakfast plate were untouched. The yolk of his eggs had long since gone firm. He poured the coffee out into the old flower-bed bucket and sat in the rocker, letting it creak with each lean forward. Across the hedgerow beyond the white-trimmed houses of Briarwood Hills, a blackbird perched on the HOA's mailbox sign. Even it seemed out of place. The quiet broke when Lucille Davenport ambled up the path, her straw handbag bouncing at her side. "Walter," she called gently, "you see what happened to your garden?" He nodded once. "Saw it this morning. Someone drove through. Didn't even bother to slow down." Lucille clucked her tongue, scanned the damage from the porch. "Couldn't have been a kid? That's too neat. Too straight." They both knew who it probably was, but neither of them said it. Not yet. That afternoon, while Walter patched a cracked fence slat, the crunch of tires on gravel drew his gaze toward the driveway. Karen Whitmore stepped out of her pearl-white SUV in tailored beige slacks and a powder-blue blouse embroidered neatly over the breast with the Briarwood Hills HOA emblem. "Afternoon, Walter," she said, as though greeting a neighbor she genuinely liked. He stood, brushing dust from his palms. "Something I can help you with?" She looked toward the garden, arms crossed. "We've received some concerns. The vines from your clematis are crossing into HOA-maintained property. It's starting to look unregulated." Walter looked to the fence. The vines, barely the thickness of a pencil, curled delicately along the wooden edge, not even reaching the boundary post. "They've always grown there," he said. "Martha planted them herself." Karen offered a tight smile. "I understand sentiment, Walter, but HOA bylaws are clear. Any vegetation crossing the shared fence line can be considered a structural violation." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached down and plucked a stray leaf from the post, examining it like a clue in some deeper puzzle. Then, calmly, "They're flowers, Karen. They're not hurting anybody." "I'm just here as a courtesy," she replied, "to give you a heads up before a formal complaint is filed." Without waiting for further exchange, she turned and walked briskly back to her vehicle, her heels tapping against the pavement like a ticking clock. That night, long after the fireflies had taken over the corners of the porch and Lucille had gone back home with a borrowed jar of plum jam, Walter sat in the rocker with a glass of iced tea and the old photo album Martha kept by her side of the bed. Every page was full of flowers and hands, hers planting, his holding. There was one shot of the garden from the first year they put it in together, back when the HOA hadn't even existed. The peace was shattered by the sudden growl of an engine. He snapped upright, heart quickening. Through the blinds, he caught the blur of headlights swinging wide across the lawn, then receding. The red glow of brake lights pulsed once before disappearing down Cedar Avenue. Too fast, too deliberate. He stood on the porch but saw only darkness and a long streak in the grass where the vehicle had passed. By morning, the true damage lay open. The clematis was shredded. The trellis leaned, broken at its base. Lilies were flattened in 2 perfect rows, the deep impressions of off-road tires etched like scars across Martha's garden. Walter didn't speak as he cleaned up what he could, just moved from stem to stem, brushing dirt from petals and pulling weeds that didn't need pulling. As the sun climbed over the rooftops, he heard Lucille's footsteps again. She said nothing, just stood beside him and offered a handkerchief. He didn't take it. Instead, he reached into the mailbox. There, folded neatly, was a crisp letter in an envelope bearing the HOA seal. The heading, bold and impersonal, read, "Formal Violation Notice, Unauthorized Garden Structure." Eli hadn't meant to dig up a fight. He just wanted to help his grandfather fix a broken fence. The July sun hadn't let up all day, and the air hung thick with heat and the sharp, sweet scent of crushed cilantro. Eli's shirt clung to his back as he knelt beside the fence line at the rear of the garden, a weathered hammer lying in the dirt beside him. He'd flown down from Atlanta the night before, after Walter called. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, "If you've got time, the fence needs tending." And Eli, who hadn't seen his grandfather in months, made time. Lucille had said it best last Christmas. Karen's HOA isn't about community, it's about control. He hadn't understood what she meant until now. Walter was hunched beside the porch steps, sharpening garden shears and sipping sweet tea. Eli worked in silence until the tip of his spade struck something solid, metallic, dull. Curious, he swept the dirt aside, revealing the rounded edge of an old boundary marker, a corroded iron post, half buried beneath creeping grass roots and soil hardened by decades. "Grandpa," he called out, "come take a look at this." Walter shuffled over, wiping his hands on his pant leg, his brow furrowed as he crouched beside the marker. "Haven't seen that old thing in years," he murmured. "Your great-grandpa put those in himself, back when property lines were respected more than contracts." Eli tilted his head. "It's outside the HOA fence by almost 2 feet." Walter's gaze followed the line to where the new development's rear fence ran, straight, rigid, and just a little too close. He didn't say anything, but the tension in his jaw made it clear he was thinking hard. Inside, the house still carried Martha's touch in the air. The scent of lavender sachets lingered in drawers, and the bookshelf in the living room sagged slightly in the middle, its shelves crowded with hand-labeled folders, gardening books, and recipe cards. Eli followed Walter in as he shuffled toward the top shelf. "Hand me that green one," Walter said, pointing with his chin. Eli pulled down a thick gardening book, The Joy of Southern Planting, its spine faded but intact. Inside, tucked between pages on heirloom tomatoes and rotating soil, lay a folded sheet of aged paper and a note in looping cursive. "Never let anyone move this border, not even time." Martha Walter's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the yellowed page. It was a hand-drawn plat map, annotated in Martha's handwriting. A single parcel line was circled in red. The area behind the house stretched 25 feet further than the fence that now stood against it. "That clubhouse," Walter said slowly, "sits square on this." Eli exhaled. "We need to verify it." They drove in silence to the county office, the hum of the old pickup truck steady and grounding. The records room smelled like laminate and stale coffee. B. Morgan sat behind the front desk, her white hair pinned up with a pencil, glasses perched halfway down her nose. "Well, I'll be," she said, flipping through the file. "You still hold clear title to this section, Walter. Parcel 9C was never formally subdivided. The HOA development stopped just short, on paper anyway. She laid the developer's map beside Martha's, then overlaid both on the county GIS printout. "They built over your line," B said, tapping the east edge of the clubhouse drawing. "Legally, you can take it all down. That clubhouse sits on your wife's tomatoes." Eli grinned despite himself. "You've still got bite, B." B adjusted her glasses. "Still got teeth, too. They just happen to be in my purse right now." Walter didn't smile. He just stared at the overlapping lines. The clubhouse, the garden, the careless decisions masked as development. He spoke at last. "We fight this." For her, back at the house, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Martha's garden. Walter sat on the porch swing, the map open on his lap. Eli brewed tea in the kitchen. The evening air buzzed with cicadas, the kind of sound Martha used to say meant rain was coming. Walter folded the map with care, each crease pressed flat with the side of his hand. He slipped it into the pocket of his work shirt. "Then I know where to drive the blade." The only thing colder than the clubhouse air conditioning was Karen's smile. Walter stood just inside the doorway, taking in the polished mahogany table, the chilled air, and the faint scent of citrus perfume that clung to the leather chairs. The room was built to impress: coffered ceilings, gold-framed maps of Briarwood Hills, and a long row of floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over manicured lawns that used to be cornfield stubble. He felt out of place in his faded button-down and scuffed boots, but he didn't flinch. Across from him, Karen sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, lips pursed like she was savoring something bitter and calling it sweet. "Walter," she said, as though welcoming an old friend to a negotiation. "We appreciate your concern." Lucille sat quietly off to the side, a small notepad in her lap and reading glasses perched on her nose. Tom Ellison, the HOA's vice president, gave Walter a polite nod, but said nothing. His tie looked a little too tight. Walter placed a worn folder on the table and began to spread out its contents. Survey maps, a faded deed from 1961, Martha's hand-drawn boundary sketch, each document laid down like a card in a quiet game of poker. "This," Walter said, tapping a map with his knuckle, "is the original plat, confirmed by the county and notarized just 2 days ago." Karen leaned forward slightly, examining the map with a neutral expression. Then she smiled. "That map is sentimental fiction," she said, almost laughing. "Walter, we've had certified surveys conducted by the HOA's legal team. This clubhouse was approved 15 years ago. You're confusing nostalgia with fact." Tom cleared his throat. "It might not hurt to revisit the boundaries, just to be sure. A third-party assessment—" Karen cut him off with a sharp glance. "No need. We verified our side." Walter remained still. "You built your clubhouse over my land. You tore up Martha's garden. I'm not confusing anything." Karen tapped a manicured nail against the table. "Let me be clear. Further accusations will be considered harassment. If you interfere with HOA property again, we'll take legal action." There was a pause. Lucille closed her notebook slowly. Tom shifted in his seat. Walter's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You came onto my land, destroyed my wife's garden, sent me a violation notice for plants she put in 30 years ago, and now you sit here telling me I imagined it." He gathered the papers, folded them with care, and placed them back in the folder. "I'm too old to start fights," he said evenly, "but too stubborn to walk away." He left without waiting for a reply. The afternoon sun had turned golden when Lucille found him on the porch, rocking gently and sipping iced tea from an old mason jar. A small plate of lemon bars rested on the table between them. "They poked the wrong bear," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Walter didn't smile. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. "B," he said when she answered, "let's file the injunction and warm up the bulldozer." Later that evening, the television glowed faintly in the living room. A local news anchor, hair neatly parted, read from the prompter with practiced calm. Local veteran prepares legal action to reclaim land from HOA. Walter Green didn't say a word when he parked the bulldozer. He didn't need to. It was barely 7 in the morning when the yellow Caterpillar rumbled its way down Magnolia View Drive, moving slow and steady like an old man with purpose. The sunrise painted the clouds with hints of coral and gold, while the grass still glistened from a soft rain that had fallen overnight. Walter's hands gripped the wheel firmly. He wore his cleanest denim shirt and a pair of boots he hadn't laced up since Martha's memorial. When he reached the edge of the clubhouse lawn, he stopped. No screech, no flare, just a low, final puff of diesel. He killed the engine, opened the metal cabin door, and placed a plastic folder on the dashboard, its seal clearly marked. Green Vias Briarwood HOA, county injunction enclosed. Then he climbed down and stood beside the machine like a stone that had always belonged there. Cameras clicked from the sidewalk. Bee arrived moments later in a sensible gray pantsuit and a wide-brimmed straw hat. She looked like she was heading to a gardening club meeting, not a potential standoff. In one hand, she carried a manila envelope with a blue court stamp visible through the paper. "He doesn't have to use it," she told the assembled crowd. "He only has to prove he can." From the clubhouse steps, Karen appeared with 2 assistants flanking her. Her mouth was pressed into a line, makeup flawless, heels too sharp for the dew-covered ground. "What is this?" she asked, eyes locked on Walter. "You're creating a scene. This is a residential zone, not a construction site." Bee stepped forward. "Mr. Green has a court-certified order confirming legal ownership of the land currently occupied by this structure. He has the right to reclaim it at his discretion." Karen laughed, too quickly. "He parked heavy machinery in front of a community building. This is intimidation. We'll press charges." Tom Ellison emerged from the clubhouse behind her, glancing from Walter to Bee to the reporters that had started to gather along the sidewalk. The local Channel 3 news van was parked across the street, its antenna extended skyward like a warning. Walter didn't look at Karen. He looked at the people, neighbors, longtime residents, newer families holding coffee mugs, and toddlers alike. Some crossed their arms. Others leaned forward. Most just watched. Karen turned to the crowd and lifted her voice. "This isn't about gardens or fences. This is about protecting what we've built together. And that's going to require resources. Effective immediately, the HOA will be assessing a one-time emergency fee of $800 per household to fund legal defense and property reinforcements." The murmur started small, but it spread quickly. $800? Some mouths dropped open. Others whispered to each other. One man in a fishing cap cursed under his breath. Walter still said nothing. He hadn't moved since stepping off the bulldozer. Karen pointed toward him. "This is what happens when we let emotions dictate policy. We can't let one man's vendetta derail our entire neighborhood." Tom cleared his throat. "We might want to revisit." Karen shot him a glare. "Not now." Bee smiled just enough to be noticed. More cameras turned. A young reporter approached, mic outstretched. "Mr. Green, do you intend to use the equipment today?" Walter finally spoke. "Not unless I have to." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that settles when words no longer matter. Karen's expression hardened. Tom stepped back into the building. As the crowd began to thin, Lucille sidled up beside Walter, holding a paper bag of banana bread in one hand. She leaned close, voice low and even. "We're calling a vote, without her, tonight." By noon, flyers were everywhere. "Community vote tonight. Take back our voice." They fluttered from mailbox flags, slid under doormats, and waved gently on bulletin boards at the town grocery and the cafe on Main. They were printed on pastel paper, lavender, mint, peach, with a simple message in bold type. No HOA seal, no fancy formatting, just words. Words that carried. By 3 o'clock, Karen Whitmore knew she'd lost control of the narrative. Walter didn't knock on doors. He didn't stand on corners. He spent the afternoon walking the perimeter of the garden, hands behind his back, while Eli and Lucille did the moving. They handed out flyers with quiet conviction, answering questions without dramatics. Across the street, neighbors whispered over fences. Parents on porch swings compared notes. And slowly, the idea of voting wasn't just possible. It felt necessary. At 7 sharp, the clubhouse meeting room was filled beyond capacity. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum. Ceiling fans turned in slow, deliberate arcs. Some people stood pressed against the back wall, fanning themselves with folded flyers. The air was warm and thick, but the silence held. Tom Ellison stood at the podium, adjusting his tie. Thank you all for coming. This special community meeting was called in accordance with HOA Bylaws, Section 3.5. A motion has been submitted and seconded to consider the removal of a board member due to conduct not in alignment with the community's interest. Karen sat at the end of the front table, lips tight, hands folded atop a yellow legal pad. She wore a deep green blazer and a look of forced composure. Walter stood near the center aisle, back straight, folder in hand. Tom continued, "We'll begin with brief remarks. Mr. Green, the floor is yours." Walter didn't walk to the podium. He didn't need amplification. He simply stepped into the open space between rows of chairs and looked around the room. "This isn't about flowers or fences," he said. "It's about respect, about boundaries, physical and otherwise." He paused. "I've lived here longer than most of you have had mortgages. I've buried my wife beneath the same trees she planted, and I've tried to be a quiet neighbor. But sometimes quiet gets mistaken for weakness." He nodded once and returned to his seat. Next was Eli. The projector flickered to life, casting satellite images onto the pull-down screen at the front. He pointed with a laser pen. "This is a county land registry overlay. This parcel," he said, highlighting a section in red, "belongs to my grandfather. It always has. The HOA's clubhouse extends 25 feet onto that land." Murmurs. He held up a printed letter, stamped and signed. "Verified by the County Office of Land Records." Karen rose before Tom could introduce her. "I'll be brief," she snapped. "This community was designed with cohesion in mind, order, standards. We have rules for a reason. And yes, mistakes were made, but this vendetta against me personally undermines the very structure we built." She turned to Walter. "You could have handled this quietly. You chose spectacle." Then louder to the crowd. "He's not defending legacy, he's destroying ours. Our HOA is the envy of 2 counties, and you'd tear it apart over a patch of tomatoes and nostalgia." No one spoke, not even Tom. The ballots were passed out in manila folders. No speeches, no questions. Just check a box. Yes or no. Tom returned to the podium 20 minutes later, holding a small stack of papers. His voice was steady. "The votes have been counted. On the motion to remove Karen Whitmore from the board, 78% in favor." A collective exhale swept the room. On the motion to accept the land use agreement proposed by Mr. Green, 85% in favor. Karen stood slowly. Her face was stone. She didn't look at Walter, didn't look at anyone. "You'll regret this," she said, voice shaking. "All of you." Then she turned and walked out, heels echoing across the tile. No one followed. Tom glanced down at the final page, then out at the gathered neighbors. His voice was quiet but clear. "For once, we chose decency." 3 weeks later, sunflowers bloomed where the fight once stood. Their golden heads tilted gently in the breeze, towering over neat rows of marigolds, rosemary, and zinnias. Bees floated lazily from bloom to bloom, and somewhere nearby, a toddler's laughter blended with the soft rustle of leaves. It was the kind of morning Walter hadn't felt in years, clear, kind, and quiet in the right way. He moved slowly, checking the soil near the eastern beds. A small bush of heirloom tomatoes was thriving, tucked under a wooden trellis rebuilt from the old porch railing. He knelt beside it, brushing dirt from the edge of a low stone. Martha's initials, carved decades ago, were still faintly visible. In his shirt pocket was a soft handkerchief, faded floral print, the same one Martha used to keep in her apron. He unfolded it and placed it gently beside the rosebush near the center of the garden. Then he sat back on his heels and looked around, not at the flowers, but at the people. The community had gathered. Folding chairs lined the footpaths, children balanced lemonade cups on their knees, and Lucille moved among them with a basket of lemon bars and careful reminders to watch your step, those are young sprouts. A table near the garden's edge held trays of pie, jars of local honey, and a large glass container of sweet tea sweating in the sun. The smell of fresh soil and cinnamon mingled with the scent of baking from the clubhouse kitchen. For once, the air carried more than tension. It carried warmth. Tom Ellison, now officially president of the HOA, stood beside a wooden easel covered by a checkered cloth. He cleared his throat. "This land," he began, "has been through a lot. More than it should have had to. But thanks to the grace of one man and the legacy of one woman, it now belongs to everyone." He pulled the cloth back, revealing a bronze plaque. Martha's Garden, in memory of love that grew. Things. The applause was soft at first, but it spread. Not raucous, just steady. Eli stood off to the side, camera in hand, recording the moment through a quiet smile. Kids darted between chairs. Someone passed Walter a paper plate with a sliver of peach cobbler. He nodded, but didn't eat it. Karen passed by in a car. A quiet sedan, slow rolling. She didn't get out, didn't wave, just looked once, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, then disappeared down the road. No one followed. No one said a word. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun stretched shadows across the lawn, Walter walked to the center of the garden. He placed his hand on the plaque, fingers tracing the etched letters. "She'd have liked this," he said. A moment later, a boy, barely taller than the marigolds, stepped beside Eli and tugged his sleeve. "Can I grow pumpkins here?" Eli knelt down to his level and smiled. "Only if you plant 'em right." 3 weeks after the dust had settled, Martha's Garden stood not as a victory, but as a quiet reminder of what could be protected when people remembered who they were to each other. Walter hadn't won a war. He had simply refused to let a piece of love be paved over without a voice. In small towns and quiet neighborhoods, respect isn't enforced with rules. It's nurtured like sunflowers in soft soil. Sometimes the loudest stand is made in silence, with roots that run deep and bloom long after the noise fades.